2,400 people were trapped underneath the city that night. The one person alive who knew how to get them out was standing in the freezing rain on Madison Avenue, holding up a city credential, being told by a police lieutenant that she was not who she said she was. She was 63 years old. Her coat was soaked through. She had driven there in a borrowed Buick with a cracked taillight. And above the subway entrance behind him, a clock she could not stop was counting down 29 minutes of emergency air. Her name was Elaine Brooks. She was the transit commissioner of the city of Bellwether, and the officer standing in front of her had already decided that she wasn't. Lieutenant Daniel Mercer ran her card through the portable reader a second time. Nothing. Not an error message, not a red light, just a dead gray screen and the soft click of a device asking a network that no longer existed. "The network is down," Elaine said. "It went down 40 minutes ago, along with half this city." "I know." "Then why are you still scanning it?" "Because sometimes the local validation cache still answers." "It isn't going to answer tonight, Lieutenant." Mercer looked at the photograph on the card. It was 6 years old. In it, her hair was shorter and darker, and she was standing under bright office lighting in a navy blazer, the way people stand when a photographer tells them to look official. The woman in front of him had gray at her temples, rain running off the end of her nose, and department store shoes that had already given up. "Transit Commissioner Elaine Brooks," he read. "Yes. Do you have secondary identification?" She handed him her driver's license. He compared the two names. They matched perfectly, and it changed nothing, and they both knew it. "This confirms you're Elaine Brooks," he said. "It doesn't confirm the credential." Behind him, 50 feet away, the mouth of Central Station glowed a dull amber. Firefighters were carrying air tanks down the stairs 2 at a time. A generator coughed somewhere near the curb. Every emergency vehicle in the northern half of Bellwether seemed to be parked on that one street, and their lights turned the falling rain into a slow red and white snow. Below all of it, 3 trains sat motionless in the dark. Elaine looked past him at the entrance and made herself speak calmly. "Lieutenant, call Transit Control." "Transit Control isn't answering external verification requests." "We've tried." "Then call Deputy Commissioner Miguel Alvarez." She gave him the number. He typed it in. He listened. He lowered the phone. "Network congestion." "Then call the mayor." "Ma'am, I am not calling the mayor's office because a person at a barricade tells me she's a commissioner." "That's exactly what a person who isn't a commissioner would tell me." It was, Elaine had to admit, not an unreasonable sentence. It was the way he said it that stayed with her. There was no cruelty in it, no sneer. It was said with a kind of settled, comfortable certainty, the tone of a man who already knew which of the two of them understood how the world worked, and was being patient about it. She had heard that tone in budget hearings, on construction sites, in a conference room in 1994 when a contractor asked her to bring coffee. It had worn a great many uniforms over 41 years. Tonight it wore a police lieutenant's rain jacket. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Tell me exactly. I'll get it." "Electronic verification. Unavailable. A command officer who personally recognizes you. My command officers are either underground or inside that building, which is the place you are refusing to let me enter." Then we wait. "We can't wait. Everybody says that during an emergency." "No." Her voice did not rise, but something in it hardened, and Mercer noticed. "Everybody says their problem can't wait. I am telling you that the air under your feet can't wait." Those are different sentences. His radio broke in before he could answer. "Inner perimeter. Hold all access. Fire command reports smoke migration into the service corridor." The words hung there in the rain between them. Elaine spread her hands. "There. Now you've heard it from someone you believe." Mercer's jaw tightened. "And now I'm even less inclined to send an unverified civilian down there." "Civilian? You know what I meant." "I think I do," Elaine said. For the first time, something moved behind his eyes. He was 41 years old, 15 years on the bellwether force, and he had been standing on that corner for exactly 18 minutes with one instruction: no one enters the inner perimeter without verification. In those 18 minutes, he had already turned away 2 reporters holding badges from a television station that had gone out of business, a private contractor with an expired county pass, and a city councilman who genuinely seemed to believe that winning an election made him part of an incident command structure. He was, by any reasonable measure, doing his job. That was going to be the difficult part of the story later. Not that he had been wrong, that he had been partly right. Elaine stepped back from the barricade. Arguing was not going to open it. She had learned that somewhere around her 3rd year in the department, standing in a flooded pump room at 2 in the morning while a supervisor explained why her calculations couldn't possibly be correct. Arguing didn't open doors. Finding another door did. She pulled out her phone and started down her contacts, and the names went by like a list of everything that had failed tonight. Alvarez, no connection. Transit Control, busy signal. Leonard Shaw, her chief engineer, nothing at all. Then her thumb stopped on a name she had not called in almost a year. Harold Benjamin, 74 years old, retired 21 years, former superintendent of subway ventilation, City of Bellwether, the man who, in 1987, had hired a 24-year-old junior engineer over the objections of 2 people with better handshakes. He picked up on the 4th ring. Elaine Brooks, it is raining and the power is out, and I am watching the news. This is either a social call or the worst night of your career. Take a guess. You sound wet. I'm standing outside Central Station in the rain because a police lieutenant won't let me into my own subway system. There was a pause on the line. Then Harold Benjamin laughed so hard he had to put the phone down. It isn't funny, Harold. It is from where I'm sitting. He coughed, recovered. All right. What's happened? C-17. The laughter stopped so completely she could hear his chair creak. Say that again? Electrical room C-17. Fire alarm, heat and smoke. Suppression discharged, and the readings are still climbing. Grid 4 is down. We're on battery ventilation, and I have 3 trains stopped in the tunnels between Franklin and Union Junction. How many people? 2,408. She heard him breathe out slowly. How long on the batteries? 28 minutes when I got here. Call it 24 now. Where are they planning to walk them out? Service Tunnel B, south to Central Access. It's the route on the emergency schematic. The silence that followed was long enough that Elaine looked at the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Harold? Don't use it, he said. Something cold moved down her spine that had nothing to do with the rain. Why not? Because it isn't there anymore. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the city. Bellwether was an old northeastern town, the kind built in layers, each generation pouring itself over the top of the last one and forgetting what was underneath. Brick beneath glass, trolley rails beneath asphalt, steam pipes beneath fiber optic cable. A stone church wedged between 2 office towers like a book left on a shelf that had been rearranged around it. And under nearly all of it, 73 miles of subway tunnel, carrying just under 1 million people on an ordinary weekday. Elaine Brooks had spent 41 years learning those tunnels. Her father had spent 34 years down there before her. Samuel Brooks joined Bellwether Transit in 1958 as a track laborer. In those years, crews carried steel flashlights heavy enough to be used as clubs, and they talked to the outside world through wall-mounted telephones spaced hundreds of yards apart. If something went wrong between 2 of those telephones, you walked. By the time he retired, he knew the system the way some men know scripture. He could tell you which tunnel he was standing in by the echo of an approaching train. He knew where old drains had been paved over. He remembered platforms that no longer appeared on any passenger map, and he remembered them the way other men remembered ball games. When Elaine was small, her father sometimes came home carrying the smell of steel dust and machine oil in his jacket. Her mother complained about it every time. Elaine loved it. It smelled like the secret world under the sidewalk. "You know why people trust trains?" Samuel asked her once. She was 11. They were sitting at the kitchen table with the radio on. "Because they're fast?" "No." "Because they're cheap?" "No." She gave up. He tapped the table with one thick finger. "Because the train goes where the map says it goes. A map is a promise, baby. Somebody wrote it down and promised you." She laughed. "That's it? That's the whole thing?" "That's everything." He looked at her a moment longer, and then he said the other part, the part she wouldn't understand for another 40 years. "But if the day ever comes when the map and the tunnel disagree, believe the tunnel." At 18, she became the first person in her family to go to college. At 23, she graduated in civil engineering. At 24, Bellwether Transit hired her as a junior systems engineer, and she spent the next 14 years inspecting drainage pumps, emergency exits, electrical rooms, air shafts, and structures that 1 million passengers a day rode past without ever knowing existed. There were men who assumed she was a secretary. There were men who assumed she was there to take notes. There was one project manager who, mid-sentence with another engineer, handed her his coffee without looking. Elaine took it. She set it down carefully in the middle of his blueprints, and then she explained, in front of everyone, why his ventilation calculations were off by a factor that would have mattered a great deal in a fire. She never forgot his face. Neither did he. By 38, she was supervising tunnel rehabilitation. By 46, she was deputy chief engineer. At 55, she was running capital projects, and at 61, the mayor appointed her transit commissioner. The newspapers all led with the same fact. She was the first black woman ever to hold the job. Elaine understood why that mattered, and she never once pretended it didn't. But privately, she cared about a smaller, stranger fact that nobody printed. She was the first commissioner in 27 years who had ever actually worked underground. At 6:13 on a Tuesday evening in January, the lights went out across more than half of Bellwether. Elaine wasn't at headquarters. She was 6 miles away in the basement hall of St. Matthew's Community Center, speaking to about 60 retired transit employees about a plan to preserve the department's historical records. The room was full of people who had spent their lives driving buses, repairing track, mopping station floors, running signal towers, and counting fares. Most were in their 70s. A few were in their 80s. One man in the second row had worked with her father and still called her, to her face, Sam's girl. She was halfway through an answer about microfilm when every fluorescent tube in the ceiling died at once. For one full second, the room was absolutely black. Somebody laughed the nervous laugh people laugh in the dark. Then the battery lights came on, throwing everybody's shadow up the wall. Elaine's phone was already vibrating. Transit control. Brooks. Miguel Alvarez was shouting over a room that sounded like an airport. "We lost grid 4. How much of the system?" "Red, green, most of blue." "Signal power's gone with it." "Trains?" "Emergency braking. They're stopping wherever they are." "How many are underground?" "Counting." "Ventilation." "Battery backup engaged." "Automatic." "Cause?" "Utilities calling. It a cascading transformer fault. They will not give me a restoration estimate." Elaine was already walking toward the door, and half the room was watching her go. "Miguel, any train stopped at a platform, get it unloaded now. Nobody enters the system from the street. Nobody. Already moving on it. How many trains stopped in tunnel?" 3 confirmed. "Passengers?" "I don't know yet." "You will in 5 minutes." She turned at the door and found the community center director already holding out a set of keys. Elaine looked at them. "What is this?" "It's a 19-year-old Buick, and it starts every time. You want to stand here and wait for something prettier?" She caught the keys. No. She was almost out the door when the old man from the second row called after her. "Sam's girl." She stopped. "Go on and take care of them." She nodded once and went out into the rain. Outside, the city had changed in a way that was difficult to describe. Traffic lights were dead. Storefronts were dark. Every window in the towers downtown had gone flat and gray, and the whole skyline looked like a photograph of itself. People stood on the sidewalks holding up phones, not calling anyone, just holding them, as if the light was the point. Elaine drove with Alvarez on speaker. Train 817, stopped north of Franklin. Count, 812. Next, 1242, south of Central, 796. Third, Blue Line 591, approaching Union Junction, approximately 800. She did the arithmetic without slowing down. 2400. Ventilation sectors? Alvarez hesitated, and she knew before he spoke that the night had a second half. That's the problem, Commissioner. We have a fire alarm in electrical room C17. Her hands tightened on the wheel. Between Franklin and Central. Yes, ma'am. What kind of alarm? Heat and smoke both. Confirmed fire? Not confirmed. Suppression discharged automatically. Did the readings clear after discharge? A pause. No. Smoke reading is increasing. Elaine knew that room. She had stood inside it in 1991 with a clipboard and a bad flashlight, before half the people currently sitting in transit control had been born. C-17 sat directly alongside one of the oldest ventilation branches in the entire system. If smoke got into the wrong air channel, the emergency fans, the fans that existed to save people, would carry it straight toward the stranded trains. What are the ventilation batteries showing? 91%, 36 minutes at current load. Current load won't hold. I know. Cut platform ventilation in every station you've already evacuated. Every one. Preserve tunnel fans. That's the only thing that matters. Doing it now. 17 minutes after the blackout, she reached Madison Avenue and found it sealed 3 blocks out in every direction. She left the Buick at a hydrant because there was no version of tonight in which anyone was going to write her a ticket, and she walked. She had no umbrella. By the time she reached the outer perimeter, her gray coat had gone almost black. The first officer looked at her city credential and waved her through. The second one glanced at it and pointed her toward the command entrance. At the third barricade stood Lieutenant Daniel Mercer. Harold, listen to me carefully. Elaine had turned her back to the barricade, one finger pressed against her free ear. Say that again about Service Tunnel B. They blocked it, permanently. During the North Concourse retrofit. When? 2008. That was a temporary closure, Harold. I signed off on the traffic plan myself. It was supposed to be temporary. They never reopened it. They poured a masonry closure and moved on. That would be documented. Harold made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It is documented. It's in the final construction exception report, which is a paper document, in a box, in an archive, because nobody ever went back and changed the digital emergency plan. Elaine closed her eyes and stood very still in the rain. Somewhere below her feet, 812 people were sitting in a dark train, waiting for a plan that ended at a wall. Harold, I need another route. There is nothing else on the schematic large enough. Then get off the schematic, he said. What about Central Mail? What? The Central Mail platform. Harold, that was sealed in the 70s. The passenger side was sealed in the 70s. The service passage stayed. It runs up under the old post office, the building they turned into the courthouse annex. And something moved in her memory. Not a document, not a drawing. A Saturday morning. Iron stairs. Her father's hand around hers. How do you know it's still there? She asked. Because in 1978, they wanted to fill the whole thing with concrete, and I sat in the meetings where it didn't happen. His voice changed slightly. Elaine. Is that lieutenant still standing there? He is. Then put me on with him. She turned around and held out the phone. Lieutenant, I have a retired superintendent of ventilation on this line. That doesn't verify your identity. No, but he has information your fire chief needs in the next 10 minutes, and you can take that from me or you can take it from him." Mercer looked at the phone for 2 full seconds. Then he took it. "This is Lieutenant Daniel Mercer, Bellwether Police." Harold's voice came through loudly enough that Elaine could hear every word. "Son, I don't care who you are. Put Elaine Brooks underground." "Sir, identify yourself." "Harold Benjamin, Superintendent of Subway Ventilation, retired, employee number 03816. Mercer wrote it in his notebook, which Elaine noted was the first genuinely useful thing he had done. "And how do you know this woman?" "I hired her in 1987, and I've regretted it about twice a year ever since, which is how you know it was a good decision." A pause. "If she says she's Commissioner Brooks, then either she's Commissioner Brooks or somebody has performed a miracle and produced a second woman on this earth, stubborn enough to sound exactly like her." Mercer handed the phone back. "That still isn't official authentication." "Then authenticate him," Elaine said. And to his credit, he did. He raised police command on the emergency exchange, which, after 4 failed attempts, finally connected, and read the employee number. A dispatcher searched city personnel records by hand. Benjamin, Harold, former employee, identity confirmed, which proved that Harold Benjamin existed. It proved nothing whatsoever about the woman standing in the rain. 22 minutes. What broke it, in the end, was not a system. It was a man running. George Wilkins was 58 years old, a transit supervisor in an orange safety vest, and he came around the corner of the station house at a speed that his knees were going to bill him for later. "Commissioner." Mercer turned. George stopped dead. "What in the world are you doing out here?" "Apparently," Elaine said, "waiting to become myself." George looked at Mercer with an expression of pure disbelief. "That is Commissioner Brooks." "I need command verification." "You need what?" "Electronic credentials, or confirmation from an authorized command officer." "She is the authorized command officer. She's the top of the whole chart. I've worked under that woman for 14 years. And I've been instructed that no unverified personnel enter this perimeter." Elaine watched the two of them square off and understood, with a clarity that came from 4 decades of watching institutions collide, that this was about to become a different kind of problem. Not a physical one, a jurisdictional one. 2 men, each defending a rule, each entirely convinced he was the responsible party. There was no time for that. "George," she said. He stopped. "Who's underground right now?" "Fire Chief Brennan, Chief Engineer Shaw, Police Captain Nolan." "Can you raise Shaw?" "Radio only. It's rough down there." "Do it." George keyed his shoulder mic. "Transit 1 to Engineer Command." Static. "Transit 1 to Engineer Command." More static. Then, chopped and distant. "Transit 1, go." Leonard. "Commissioner Brooks is standing at Inner Barricade 3. Police need an identity confirmation." A long pause full of noise. "Brooks?" Elaine took the radio out of George's hand. "Leonard, it's Elaine." The signal cleared just enough. "Elaine, where have you been? We've been calling you for 20 minutes. She looked directly at Mercer as she answered. "Outside." Something in the lieutenant's face changed. He reached for the radio, and she let him take it. "Sir, this is Lieutenant Mercer, Bellwether Police." "Can you formally verify the identity of the person transmitting?" "Elaine Brooks, Transit Commissioner, my boss. Verified, confirmed, and for the love of everything, send her down here." Mercer lowered the radio, looked at Elaine for 1 second longer than he needed to. Then he pulled the barricade aside. 20 minutes. "Go," he said. Elaine didn't move. "What?" he said. She pointed at his radio. "Come with me. I'm assigned to this post." "Then, reassign yourself. I don't take orders from you. Tonight you do. The moment Police Command puts this scene under Unified Incident Command, which happened about the time you were scanning my card the second time." She held his eyes. "Come downstairs, Lieutenant." "Why?" Because you just spent 14 minutes keeping me on a sidewalk. I'd like you close enough to see what those 14 minutes buy. She turned and walked toward the station before he could answer. After a moment, he followed. Central Station had been emptied, and an empty subway station is one of the strangest places on Earth. No advertisements glowing, no turnstiles clicking, no music from the man who played saxophone by the North Stairs every evening. Emergency lighting had turned the whole concourse a dim, honey-colored amber, and the space that normally carried announcements and footsteps and arguments and laughter now sounded exactly like what it was, a very large basement. Firefighters were moving down to the lower platform in pairs, carrying tanks and lamps and coils of rope. Chief Engineer Leonard Shaw was standing at a folding table under a work light, both hands flat on a printed diagram. He was 52, gray-bearded, and he looked like a man who had aged 4 years in 40 minutes. When he saw Elaine, his shoulders came down 2 inches. "Finally! Give it to me." Fires contained to C-17, but the heat took out cable trays on the east side and smoke got into the service duct before suppression caught it. "Emergency extraction is running." "Which direction?" "East." Elaine felt it in her stomach. "Toward 817. Toward 817. Battery time? 18 minutes at present draw. Conditions on the trains?" Shaw checked a note. 1242 is clean. 591 is clean. 817 reports an odor in the rear cars. No visible haze yet. "Evacuation plan?" He tapped the diagram. "Fire department wants to walk 817's passengers south through Service Tunnel B to Central Access. It's the shortest route out of the smoke path." Elaine looked down at the drawing. It was a good drawing. It was clean and legible, and it had a revision block in the corner with 6 annual review stamps in it, one on top of another, going back 6 years. And it was wrong. If the day ever comes when the map and the tunnel disagree. "Stop," she said. Shaw looked up. "What?" "This map is wrong." "Elaine, it's the current emergency schematic. It's the one we drill on. It's wrong." "How?" She put her finger on the connection at the south end of Service Tunnel B. "This doesn't exist. I've walked it." "When?" 8 years ago. "And something changed after that." She dialed Harold and put him on speaker in the middle of the table. And 8 firefighters and a police captain and a fire chief all leaned in to listen to a 74-year-old man in a recliner in a dark apartment across town. "Shaw, I'm here. Your evacuation tunnel was permanently closed during the North Concourse retrofit. Masonry closure, 2008. That was temporary. They never reopened it." Shaw stared at the paper in front of him. "That would have been documented." "It was documented," Harold said. "In the construction exception report. On paper. In a box. Which nobody reads, because the digital plan was never revised." Nobody at the table said anything. Chief Brennan broke the silence. "Verify it, now." A fire lieutenant took 2 men south into Service Tunnel B at a jog. They came back in 3 minutes. "Wall," he said. "Solid. Full section, floor to ceiling. No door, no panel, nothing. 15 minutes. Shaw's face had gone the color of the concrete behind him. We were 4 minutes from walking 800 people into a dead end, in smoke, with the batteries running out. Nobody answered him. Mercer, standing at the edge of the light with rain still on his shoulders, said quietly, "All that? Because of an old map?" Elaine turned and looked at him. "Because everybody trusted the map." He didn't say anything else after that. Commissioner. Brennan was a wide, calm man with 30 years on the job, and he had the specific steadiness of someone who has already decided he isn't going to panic tonight. "We need another route in the next 10 minutes, or I'm going to have to make a much worse decision." Elaine bent over the drawings and went through them the way she had gone through drawings for 41 years. Passenger tunnels, too far. Maintenance shafts, vertical ladders, useless for 800 people including the elderly. Crossovers, They led back toward the smoke. Electrical corridors, 18 inches wide. Nothing big enough. Nothing safe enough. And then, because a 74-year-old man had said it out loud 20 minutes earlier, a door opened in her memory. Central Mail. She closed her eyes. She was 9 years old. It was a Saturday, and her mother was working a shift at the hospital laundry, and her father had been called in unexpectedly, and there was nobody to watch her. So Samuel Brooks had taken his daughter to work. They had gone through a green steel service door, down a flight of iron stairs that rang under their shoes, past pipes wrapped in canvas, and then out onto a platform unlike any subway station she had ever seen. No signs, no benches, no advertisements. Just track, and a long, broad concrete apron where mail sacks had once been slung from train doors onto carts. Her father had pointed at a wide brick archway at the north end. Before the trucks took over, half the mail in this city came through that hole in the wall. Elaine opened her eyes. The Central Mail platform. Shaw frowned. The what? Exactly, she said. That's the problem. Where is it? Behind the sealed wall north of Track 4. That area isn't on this plan. No, it isn't. Brennan leaned in. Where does it come out? The basement of the old Central Post Office. The courthouse annex? That building was the post office. They kept the shell and gutted the inside. Brennan straightened up, and Elaine watched him do the geography in his head. That's 400 yards northwest. That's completely outside the smoke path. If the passage still exists. How wide? 8 feet. Maybe 10. Stairs? A service ramp. Gentle. You could roll a hand truck up it. Can we move 800 people up it? Yes. Shaw put both hands on the table. Elaine, that facility has been abandoned for 50 years. You're going to bet 2,400 people on something you remember from when you were 9. Elaine looked at him steadily. No, I'm betting that my father knew these tunnels better than the people who erased them from the drawings. 12 minutes. Brennan picked up his radio. Move. They went down onto Track 4 with 6 firefighters, a demolition crew, Shaw, Mercer, and a portable light plant that 2 men carried between them like a stretcher. The tunnel was silent in a way that people who ride subways never hear. No rail hum, no distant brakes. Just water somewhere, and boots, and breathing. Elaine had not walked this section in almost 9 years. At 63, her knees had opinions about the ballast and the ties and every one of the 22 steps down from the platform, and she ignored all of them. They passed a locked equipment cabinet, a signal relay box, an emergency telephone with a handset from 1974, and then she stopped in front of a flat concrete wall between 2 structural columns and she said, There. Brennan put his light on it. You're sure? She looked at it for 3 seconds. And then, very quietly, she said, No. Shaw turned. What? Elaine walked forward, crouched down at the base of the wall. Her knee protested loudly enough that Mercer took a half step toward her and put her hand flat on the concrete floor. Smooth, continuous, nothing under it. This isn't it, she said. This is a storage bay. I'm remembering it from the wrong direction. When my father brought me down here, we came from the north end, not the south, and I've been carrying the picture backwards for 54 years. Nobody moved. Commissioner, Brennan said carefully, we are at 11 minutes. I know exactly what we're at. She stood up and started walking north along the wall, dragging the beam of a borrowed flashlight along the floor at her feet. Bring the light. Watch the ground, not the wall. What are we looking for? A firefighter asked. Rails. There's no track over here. There was. They went 40 feet, 60, 80. Mercer, who had said almost nothing since the concourse, was the one who found it. Ma'am. His light was pointed down at the concrete. What is that? 2 shallow grooves ran across the floor, corroded steel, worn down almost flush, filled in with grime, and half a century of dust. and they ran directly under the wall in front of them. Elaine let out a breath. That's it. Shaw stared. How can you possibly tell? It looks exactly like the last one. She put her palm on the concrete. Because walls don't need track. Brennan struck the surface twice with the flat of his hand and listened to the sound it made. Hollow block. Elaine almost laughed out loud in a subway tunnel with 800 people sitting in the dark half a mile away. Harold Benjamin had remembered right. Take it down, Brennan said. 10 minutes. The first strike of the demolition hammer rang down the tunnel like a church bell in an empty town. Dust came off the wall in a sheet. A block cracked. Another strike. Another. 2 firefighters worked in rotation, 30 seconds each, because that was all a man could give at that pace. Shaw was on the radio the whole time. 817 reports visible haze in the rear 3 cars. Move everybody forward, Elaine said. Rear cars empty, front cars packed. I don't care how uncomfortable it is. They're doing it. Conductors got them shoulder to shoulder. Train power? 7 minutes to conservation shutdown. After that, they lose interior lighting. Ventilation? 9. At 9 minutes, the hammers opened a hole the size of a dinner plate. Brennan put a light through it, and everyone crowded to see, and what came back was the reflection of white ceramic tile. A corridor. Elaine put her hand on the broken edge of the block and stood there for a moment while something moved through her that she did not have time for. Dad, she said, barely above a breath. Mercer, standing directly behind her, heard it. He did not ask. Wider, Brennan said. Get me 4 feet. At 8 minutes, the wall came down in sections, and behind it was a tiled passage sloping gently upward into the dark. Iron hooks lined one side where mail sacks had once hung. Above a brick archway, in faded gold-edged lettering, somebody in 1931 had painted, U.S. Mail Service. Shaw stared at it. My God! Federal infrastructure, Elaine said. Built to last. Send a team ahead. 2 firefighters went up the ramp at a run with lights. Their radio came back 40 seconds later. Passage is clear 100 yards. Slope is easy. Some debris, nothing blocking. Exit? Stairs at the end. Steel fire door. Open it. A pause. Negative. Doors secured from the far side. Hinges are pinned, and it's painted over. This thing hasn't opened since the Ford administration. Elaine and Brennan looked at each other. Cut it, Brennan said. Rotary saw, right now. Frame if you have to. I don't care if we take the wall with it. Chief, that's a solid door in a masonry frame. Then start. 7 minutes. Elaine keyed the radio to transit control. Miguel, begin evacuation of train 817. Route them north to the central mail access at track 4. Alvarez's voice came back thin and puzzled. Commissioner, that route doesn't exist. It isn't in the system. Elaine looked at the archway with the gold letters on it. It exists tonight. Copy, Commissioner. The saw started up 60 seconds later, and the sound of it came down the tiled passage and filled the tunnel. A high, ugly, beautiful noise. Nobody tells this part right. When people tell the story now, they talk about the wall and the map and the officer at the barricade. Almost nobody talks about what it was actually like inside train 817 for the 51 minutes before that saw started. 812 people. Interior emergency lighting only, which is about as bright as a refrigerator with the door half closed. 8 cars, no ventilation from the tunnel, and a January night pressing in on the metal. By minute 20, they had taken their coats off. By minute 30, a woman in the 4th car had passed out and been brought around by a nurse from Bellwether General, who was still in her scrubs and had been asleep against the window when the train stopped. By minute 40, the smell reached the rear cars. Not smoke exactly, more like scorched wiring, the smell of an old toaster pushed too far. And that was the moment when a young man near the back doors began pounding on the glass with the heel of his hand and saying that he was going to open them and walk. The conductor, a 26-year-old named Andre Fontaine, who had been on the job 8 months, came through that car and did the single most important thing anybody did on that train all night. He didn't shout. He walked up to the young man, put a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Brother, I know. I want out too. But there's 600 volts in the third rail out there, and it doesn't care what kind of night we're having. Walk up front with me. Come on." And the man went with him. Later, in the review, an investigator asked Andre Fontaine what training he'd drawn on for that. He said, "None. My grandmother raised me." By minute 50, an 81-year-old woman named Ruth Kaminsky was leading the second car in the 23rd Psalm, and about 40 people were saying it with her, and about 100 more were listening, and a construction worker named Danny Ortiz had given up his seat, then his jacket, then finally his water bottle, to a stranger's child. Nobody applauded any of that. Nobody filmed it. It didn't make the news. It was, Elaine would say later, the actual reason everyone lived. The first passengers came up out of the darkness at 6 minutes. They came slowly, in a long line, in the beams of firefighters' lamps. An elderly man with a cane, taking the ramp one careful foot at a time. A woman carrying a small dog zipped inside her coat, with only its face showing. The nurse in scrubs. A teenager holding his grandmother's hand and pretending it was for her benefit. Office workers with their shoes in their hands. Line cooks still in their aprons. 24 students from the community college. Nobody ran. That was the thing that everybody who was there remembers. In 51 minutes of dark and heat and fear, when the doors finally opened, nobody ran. Firefighters told them to leave their bags. Most did. A few argued and then didn't. Mercer worked the opening in the broken wall, one hand out, helping people through the gap, block by block, saying the same 4 words several hundred times. "Watch your step, ma'am." "Watch your step, sir." A woman stopped in front of him and looked at the hole in the wall and the tile passage beyond it, and she said, "Where does this go?" "Out," Mercer said. "Is it safe?" And Elaine, 20 feet away, watched him hesitate. She saw, very clearly, the man from the barricade, the man who wanted certainty, who wanted verification, who wanted a document that said yes. He didn't have one. "We're doing everything we can to make it safe," he said, "and I'm going up it right behind you." The woman nodded and went through. Elaine noticed. 4 minutes. Train 817 cleared. All 812. Train 1242 began unloading into the same route, through a cross passage, 800 yards to the south. 796 people, moving in a column that stretched further than the lights reached. 3 minutes. Shaw said, "If those fans stop, the smoke direction becomes unpredictable. It could go anywhere." "Then keep them moving," Elaine said. 2 minutes. Mercer helped an older man whose portable oxygen concentrator had run its battery flat. A firefighter carried the machine, while Mercer carried the man's arm across his shoulders. At the top of the ramp, the man stopped and grabbed Mercer's sleeve. "My wife's still on the train." "Which car?" "Third." Mercer turned to go back down. Elaine caught his sleeve. "Radio it." "I can get her. You can also become another person. Somebody has to come find." He stopped. He looked at her, and the irony sat there between them in the dark, and neither of them said one word about it. He raised his radio. A firefighter found the woman 90 seconds later in the third car, helping a stranger gather up a spilled purse. Her husband put both arms around her at the top of the ramp and did not let go for a long time. 1 minute. The emergency ventilation batteries reached the end of their run, and the fans did not stop all at once. They wound down slowly, the pitch dropping and dropping until it fell out of the range of hearing. And for the first time in her life, Elaine Brooks stood in a working subway tunnel and heard it breathe without machinery. Smoke began to gather along the ceiling, thin and gray, sliding sideways in a way that had nothing to do with anybody's plan. "Everybody low," Brennan said. "Move." Two trains were out. Train 591 was not. 800 people, and the old mail passage could not reach them. It was in the wrong place. It had been built for a post office, not for them. Shaw laid it out fast and flat. South crossover. It's the only connection. 200 feet of it runs within 40 feet of C-17. Smoke conditions? Moderate and getting worse. With the fans down, I can't predict it past 10 minutes. Alternative? He looked at her. There isn't one. If we'd had another 20 minutes on the batteries, we could have brought them all the way around and up through Mail. We don't. And there it was. Elaine did the arithmetic that she would carry for the rest of her life. 14 minutes on a sidewalk. 14 minutes was the difference between routing 800 people through clean air and routing them through 200 feet of smoke. She did not say it out loud. Not then. There was no time and no point, and no one on that platform who needed to hear it. But Mercer was standing 8 feet away, and he had heard Shaw say another 20 minutes, and Elaine saw the moment it arrived in his face. "Chief," she said to Brennan, "can you build me a protected lane? With the fans down? Portable blowers." "I have 2. Is that enough?" Brennan thought about it for exactly as long as he could afford to. For a narrow lane. Maybe. Maybe. Emergencies loved that word. She had hated it since she was 24, and she hated it now. Do it. They set the blowers at the mouth of the crossover and pushed a column of clean air down the left-hand side of the passage, and firefighters stood along it every 20 feet with lights, forming a corridor out of human beings. And then they did not move 800 people. They moved 20 at a time, hands on the shoulder of the person ahead, walking, not running, and every group briefed by a fire captain before it stepped off. Stay on the left, stay low, do not stop, do not turn around, do not go back for anything. Elaine watched the first group on a helmet camera feed on a laptop balanced on an overturned crate. 20 silhouettes went into the smoke. 19 came out. "Stop," she said. Brennan leaned over the screen. "Count again." 19. 1 missing. A firefighter went back in and found a 70-year-old man named Walter Hensley sitting against the wall about 90 feet in, one hand on his chest, saying he only needed a second. They carried him out. He was on oxygen inside 4 minutes and in an ambulance inside 11, and he spent 2 days in the cardiac unit at Bellwether General, and he lived to be 84. But he was the price of the 14 minutes, and everyone in the command post knew it, and nobody said it. The next group moved, then another, then another. After a while, time stopped being measured in minutes at all. It was measured in groups of 20, 20, 20, 20. Elaine counted every one of them herself. When the last passenger from train 591 walked up the old mail ramp and out through the cut steel door into the basement of a former post office, it was 9:47 at night. Dawn was a long way off. The fire in C-17 was contained. The smoke was clearing on natural draft. 2,408 people had come out from under the city. 16 were treated for smoke exposure. 9 were transported to hospitals for observation. 1 man had fallen on the ramp and broken a wrist, 1 man had chest pain, and every single one of them went home. Elaine came up last among the command staff, through the courthouse annex, out onto a street she had known her entire life. It was still raining. Television lights had turned the whole block white. When the firefighters came out, people cheered. When transit workers in orange vests came out, people cheered. When the passengers came out, people cheered so loudly that a woman with a small dog inside her coat started crying on live television. Nobody recognized Elaine at all. She was just another tired, older woman in a wet, dark coat walking out of a doorway. She preferred it that way. Mercer came out behind her and stopped under the awning. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then he said, "You got what you needed." Elaine turned and looked at him. "That's what you want to say to me." I followed the procedure I was given. His voice was steady, but it was working to be steady. The card didn't scan. The network was down. I had no way to know. You had 3 ways to know. You used one of them, eventually. Commissioner, Walter Hensley is 60 seconds from the cardiac unit right now because we did not have 20 more minutes of battery. She said it without raising her voice at all, which made it considerably worse. You can tell yourself the procedure did that. You'd have a case. It's a bad procedure, and I'll be saying so publicly by Thursday. Mercer said nothing. But you and I both know that a man in a suit stepping out of a Black City car would have been through that barricade in 90 seconds, and neither one of us is going to pretend otherwise standing here in the rain. He looked away, down the street, at the ambulances. I did my job, he said. You did part of it, Elaine said, and she walked away toward the command trailer, because there were 9 hospitals to call and a mayor to brief, and 2,400 incident reports beginning to exist, and because there was nothing else useful to say to a man who was not ready to hear it yet. By morning, the story had gotten out of the tunnel. At first, the coverage was about the blackout. Then it was about the trains. Then it was about the forgotten mail platform, which the newspapers loved, because it was the kind of detail that makes a city feel like a novel about itself. And then, a little after 10 a.m., somebody posted 43 seconds of body camera footage. A soaked black woman holding up a city credential. A white police lieutenant refusing to let her pass. The internet turned that into certainty before lunch. Half the country decided Mercer was a bigot in a uniform. The other half decided he was a hero holding a line against chaos. People who had never been to Bellwether and could not have found it on a map explained to each other, at great length and considerable volume, exactly what had happened on that street. The truth was less convenient than either version, which is generally the way with truth. Mercer had followed a written rule. The rule was badly written. He had also applied that rule through assumptions he had never once been made to examine. Assumptions about what authority looks like when it walks up to you in the rain. Both of those things were true at the same time, and the second one did not cancel the first, and the first one did not excuse the second. And Elaine had been delayed, but she had not been the reason anyone lived. Firefighters broke a wall. Transit workers walked 800 people through smoke 20 at a time. Engineers stretched a battery bank past its rating. A conductor 8 months on the job talked a frightened man back from a door. A 74-year-old retiree remembered a passage that the city had erased from its own records. And 2,400 ordinary people did something that is much harder than it sounds. They listened. They moved slowly. They helped the person next to them. Bellwether wanted one hero out of that night. Elaine Brooks refused to give it one. The press conference was the next afternoon. She had slept 90 minutes. She wore the same pearl earrings she'd had on in the tunnel. A reporter in the 3rd row got to it fast. Commissioner Brooks, did Lieutenant Mercer's decision put those passengers in danger? He delayed my access to the command post. For 14 minutes. Yes. Were those 14 minutes critical? Every minute was critical. That is what an emergency is. So he endangered them. Elaine looked directly into the cameras. That question is too simple for what happened. Did he do the wrong thing, yes or no? He did something understandable, for reasons that were partly appropriate and partly not. That sounds like you're protecting him. No. Then why not just condemn it? And Elaine Brooks gave the answer that ended up on the front page. Because condemnation is easier than diagnosis. The room got quiet. If we decide that Lieutenant Mercer is the entire problem, she said, then we get to skip everything else. We get to ignore a city credential system with no reliable way to verify anyone when the network fails. We get to ignore an emergency plan that assumed cell service. We get to ignore a unified command manual that never defined how a senior civilian official gains access when the electronics stop working. And we get to ignore an official evacuation map that was wrong for 18 years and passed 6 annual reviews anyway. Another reporter raised a hand. And race, Commissioner? Was that part of it? Elaine did not flinch. Yes. How do you know? Because a great many things about that evening were unusual, and one thing about it was extremely familiar. Should he be disciplined? That isn't my decision. Do you want him disciplined? She thought about it for a moment. I want him educated by something more useful than humiliation. That sentence traveled further than anything else she said in 41 years of public service. The formal review took 3 weeks and it embarrassed almost everyone. Investigators found that Mercer had followed the written inner perimeter rule but had failed to use 2 available alternative verification methods soon enough. They also found the rule itself was poorly designed. No offline mode, no defined path for senior officials, no allowance for the exact failure that had actually occurred. Then they got to the map, and the map was worse. Construction records confirmed Service Tunnel B had been permanently closed in 2008. A paper revision existed. The digital emergency plan had never been changed. It had gone through 6 annual reviews. Each reviewer had verified that the document had been reviewed. Nobody had ever walked the route. Elaine read that last sentence 3 times. Then she set the report down and called Harold Benjamin. You were right. I'm right about many things. Don't spoil it. He laughed. They found the exception report? In an archive box in a sub-basement, exactly where you said it would be. Of course they did. Harold, can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. Why did you remember Central Mail? You retired 21 years ago. Why is that the thing that stayed? There was a pause on the line long enough that she thought the call had dropped. Because of your father, Harold said. Elaine sat down slowly. What? In '78, when they shut Central Mail down, management wanted the whole passage filled solid. Concrete. Done. It was cheaper than maintaining a door nobody used. He cleared his throat. Sam argued to keep it. As an emergency route. My father did? Your father spent the better part of 2 months bothering every man in this system who had an office and a nameplate. He wrote memos. He waited outside meetings. He was, I want to be clear with you, an enormous nuisance. Elaine laughed, and it came out wrong, and she pressed her hand over her mouth. He said one thing that stuck with me, Harold went on. He said somebody would be grateful someday for a tunnel nobody wanted. He never told me any of that. Your father didn't tell people half the good things he did. Harold's voice went gentle. He thought announcing your own usefulness was like announcing you were handsome. Better to let somebody else notice. 3 months later, Bellwether Transit held a ceremony inside the restored passage. The city wanted to name it the Elaine Brooks Emergency Corridor. She refused. The mayor argued. She refused again. The transit board took a vote and passed it anyway, and Elaine informed them, pleasantly, that she would be vetoing the entire signage budget. They surrendered. The plaque on the old brick archway, under the faded gold letters that said U.S. Mail Service, reads, Samuel Brooks Emergency Passage, preserved through the foresight of the transit workers who believed that old ways out should not be forgotten. Employee 11842, 1958-1992. Elaine stood in front of it with her father's transit badge closed in her hand. Samuel Brooks had died 16 years earlier. He never saw his daughter become commissioner. Never saw her office on the 11th floor or the newspaper photographs of her standing next to a mayor. Elaine had spent a long time wishing he had. Standing there, she found she wasn't sure he'd have cared much. He'd have inspected the passage, complained about the new lighting, asked why on earth they'd narrowed the drainage channel, and then he would have pointed out that nobody trying to get home cares whose name is on the wall. Lieutenant Mercer came to the ceremony. He stood at the back, in a dark suit, no uniform, his wife beside him. Elaine saw him and did not go over. After the crowd thinned out, he came to the plaque. Your father. Yes. He knew what he was doing. Don't tell him that, wherever he is. He'd become impossible. Mercer almost smiled. He looked older than he had in January. Not in his face exactly. Quieter. "How have you been?" Elaine asked. "Training. Mandatory? Some of it. And the rest?" "I asked for it." She looked at him. "What kind?" "Bias recognition. Emergency command. Decision-making under uncertainty." He said it flatly, like a man reading a list of medications. "That sounds unpleasant." "It is. Good courses usually are." He reached into his jacket and took out a folded photocopy, soft at the creases from being opened and refolded a great many times. "What's that?" "The old access procedure. The one I was working under." He unfolded it. One line was highlighted in yellow. "When identity cannot be electronically confirmed, access shall be denied until validation is obtained through command." Elaine read it. "What about it?" "For 15 years I thought the important words in that sentence were, 'access shall be denied.' And now? The important words are, 'validation is obtained.'" He folded it back up. "I treated verification like a wall. It was supposed to be a question." Elaine looked at him for a long moment. "That's progress. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know. I'm also not going to stand here and say I did everything wrong. I've been over it 100 times. Some of what I did was the job. Some of it was. And the rest of it wasn't." "No," Elaine said. "The rest of it wasn't." They stood there in the cleaned-up tile passage where 2,400 people had walked out of the dark. "My daughter watched the video," Mercer said. "She's 14. Elaine waited. "She asked me why I didn't believe your badge when I believed the badges of everybody else who came through that night." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I didn't have a good answer, and that I'd spent 3 months finding one." He put the paper back in his pocket. "And that sometimes you can follow a rule exactly as written and still owe somebody a better decision than the rule gave you." Elaine nodded slowly. "That's an expensive lesson." "Yes, ma'am. Make it worth the price." A year later, Daniel Mercer stood in front of a room of new recruits at the academy, with a photograph projected on the wall behind him. A woman in a soaked coat, holding up a credential. His own hand, out flat, stopping her. He didn't tell them what to think. He asked a question. "What do you see?" "An unverified person at a restricted scene," one recruit said. "A city official," said another. "A woman claiming executive access without documentation." Mercer nodded. "All true. Every one of those is true." He turned and looked at the picture. "Here's what I actually saw. I saw the answer I expected before I'd finished asking the question." He let the silence stay a while. Then he told them about the 2,400 people underneath his feet, and the dead scanner, and the network that never came back, and the wall in Service Tunnel B, and the tunnel that wasn't on the map, and the 70-year-old man they carried out of the smoke, and the 14 minutes. A recruit near the front raised her hand. "Sir, if it happened again tomorrow, would you just let her through?" Mercer shook his head. "If that's what I learned the wrong thing. Then what would you do?" "Verify faster." "How?" "Every way available to me. In parallel, starting immediately. Not one at a time while somebody stands in the rain." "And if none of it worked?" He looked at the photograph. "Then I'd have to make a decision." "Based on what, sir?" "Evidence. Not the rule." "The rule is evidence," Mercer said. "It's just not the only evidence in the room. The city rebuilt more than the corridor. Bellwether replaced its emergency credential system entirely. Senior officials got physical challenge cards with rotating codes that worked with no network at all. Police supervisors got secure offline directories, printed on paper, updated quarterly, kept in every command vehicle. Emergency drills began including communications failure as a standard condition instead of an unthinkable one. But the change Elaine cared about most was the plainest one. Every underground evacuation route in the system had to be physically inspected. Not reviewed on a screen, not stamped, walked. Once a year, on foot, by a human being with a light, who signs a form that says, I personally traversed this route end to end. People started calling it the Brooks Rule. Elaine disliked the name and liked the rule. She went along on the first annual inspection herself, at 65, because there was no chance in the world she was going to sign that policy and then watch other people carry it out. Her knees registered a formal complaint. She went anyway. They walked Central Mail on a Tuesday morning. The corridor was clean and lit now. New emergency signage pointed toward the courthouse annex. The old white tile had been preserved wherever it could be saved, and the iron mail hooks were still on the wall because Elaine had personally written "Do not remove" on the drawings in red pencil. She stopped where the block wall had been. A young engineer named Priya Shah stopped with her. "Commissioner, is it true you remembered this place from when you were a kid?" "Partly. I also remembered it backwards and cost us 3 minutes." Priya laughed. "Still, that's incredible." "No," Elaine said. "It isn't." Priya looked over, surprised. Elaine put her hand flat on the brick. "What would be incredible is if a city of 2 million people had to depend on one woman's childhood memory to correct its own emergency map. That's not a miracle, that's a warning." Priya was quiet a moment. "When you put it like that." "That is how you should put it, every time." They walked on. At the old loading platform, Priya asked, "Why did your father bring you down here that day?" "My mother was working a double, and there was nobody to watch me." Priya stopped walking. "So the city got saved because childcare fell through?" Elaine turned and looked at her. And then she laughed. Really laughed. The first time in that tunnel in 56 years. And the sound of it went down the tiled corridor and came back to them. "Apparently," she said. Her father, she thought, would have liked that very much. Elaine Brooks retired at the end of her term. The mayor tried to talk her out of it. The transit board tried. Her own staff circulated a petition, which she framed and then ignored. 41 years was enough. On her last afternoon, she packed her office herself. Awards into one box, photographs into another, rolled engineering drawings that no longer applied to anything, her father's badge, which went in her coat pocket and not in any box at all. The framed newspaper front page from the night of the blackout stayed on the wall until the very end. When she finally took it down, there was a small square of tape behind it, and under the tape, a piece of paper she had put there years before anyone had ever heard of Central Mail. It was the back of a grocery receipt from 1986. Her father had written on it in pencil, in the careful block capitals of a man who had left school at 16 and never once let it embarrass him. She had found it in his toolbox after he died. 12 words. "You don't keep people safe by knowing everything. You keep asking." She put it in her purse. At 5:30, Elaine Brooks rode the subway home. No security, no city car, no ceremony. Just a woman in a winter coat carrying one cardboard box, standing on a platform with 300 other people at the end of an ordinary Thursday. A teenager offered her his seat. She almost refused out of pride. Her knees overruled her. She sat. Across the aisle, people looked at their phones. A nurse slept against the window with her head at an angle that was going to hurt later. 2 men argued about basketball with real feeling. An older man read a paperback mystery with the cover folded back. The train pulled out and went into the tunnel, and the windows turned into black mirrors, and for a few seconds, Elaine sat looking at her own reflection. Older than the young woman who had walked into this system in 1987 with a hard hat that didn't fit. Gray at the temples. Lines at the corners of her eyes. Her father's stubborn mouth. Then the train passed a service light, and another, and she knew what was behind nearly every wall going by. Pump rooms, cable runs, emergency stairs, old tunnels and new ones, some forgotten, some preserved. All of it holding up the weight of people who would never think about it once. That was how infrastructure was supposed to work. When it succeeds, nobody notices. Nobody applauds the ventilation fan that turns. Nobody thanks the signal that stays green. Nobody praises the emergency exit that sits unused for 40 years. And almost nobody ever learns the name of the man who once refused to let somebody fill an old mail passage with concrete. At the next station, a girl got on with her father. She was maybe 9. She had her hair in 2 braids and a backpack much too large for her, and she noticed Elaine looking and whispered something. Her father glanced over. His eyes widened. "Commissioner Brooks?" Elaine smiled. "Not after 5 o'clock." He laughed. The girl kept staring, working up to something, and finally got it out. "Are you the lady from the tunnel?" "I was one of them." "You saved everybody." "No." The girl frowned hard. "That's what my teacher said." "Your teacher simplified." "Why?" "Teachers do that sometimes. So do newspapers." Elaine leaned forward, elbows on her knees, the box balanced on the seat beside her. There were about 400 people working that night. Firefighters broke the wall. Engineers stretched the batteries. A conductor kept 800 people calm in the dark. An old man remembered a door. "But you knew where the secret tunnel was." "I did." "How?" "My father showed me. Right down there." Elaine pointed at the floor of the car. "When I was about your age." The girl considered that with enormous seriousness. "Was he important?" Elaine felt the old ache, the good one. "He repaired track." The girl's forehead creased. "That's important?" "Very," Elaine said. The train ran into a tunnel, and the girl turned to watch the darkness rush past the glass, the way children do, as if there might be something out there worth seeing. Then she turned back around. "But what if you forgot?" Elaine looked at her. And there it was, from a 9-year-old girl on a Thursday evening train, the only question that had ever actually mattered. Not who was the hero, not who was the villain, not whose name went on the wall. What happens when memory fails? "Then I hope," Elaine said slowly, "that somebody else would have kept asking until they found another way out." The girl thought about it. Then she nodded, as if that were a perfectly reasonable answer, and went back to the window. Maybe it was. Elaine got off 6 stops later, and it had started to snow. Not much, just a few flakes drifting sideways under the streetlights, the kind that don't stick. She carried her box home through streets full of ordinary people going ordinary places. Behind her and below her, the trains kept running under Bellwether, through Central, past a wall that wasn't there anymore, past a doorway with a plaque on it bearing the name of a man who had spent 34 years underground and never once appeared on television. Past the place where 2,400 people had walked out of the dark, because a route nobody wanted had survived just long enough to be remembered. At the corner, Elaine stopped and looked back at the avenue. A bus went by, then another. A traffic light changed, and 100 cars moved forward together, and none of them knew a thing about any of it. That was the whole point. The city had nearly failed that night, not because one man made one mistake, but because too many people had trusted what was written down more than what was standing in front of them. A credential, a map, a procedure, a wall. Every one of them looked certain. Not one of them told the whole truth. And when the lights finally came back on, Bellwether didn't become safer because one woman turned out to be right. It became safer because a few hundred people were willing to go find out where they had been wrong. That is harder. It is rarer. And Elaine Brooks believed, until the end of her long life, that it was the only kind of progress that ever lasted.